Hey Alex, do you know what would happen if you put a bomb in space and put a bunch of bats and sprinkle some magic on top?
Sounds like you're talking about Christopher Nolan.
Yes.
So, this episode is about Christopher Nolan's recent Best Picture Oscar winner, Oppenheimer, as well as his whole career. So, this is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karen from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a filmmaker who shaped our love of movies. As we go through this, we'll also share three movies: our first love, a masterpiece, and a wild card. So, with that, Alex, what does Nolan mean to you? What has been your relationship with him?
Yeah, so he's a director who is actually probably, well, not probably, he is my favorite working director right now. I've been
Mm-hmm.
a big fan of his since the movie I will talk about on my first love. So, a little tease for that when we get to that one. But it's been over 20 years, but really, for me, cemented when he did Batman Begins, which Batman's my favorite comic book character of all time. And I never felt that Batman was properly, I don't want to say properly put on screen, but the version of Batman that I love wasn't put on screen until Chris Nolan did that film. I remember standing up in the theater at the end and giving it a standing ovation, just being
Oh wow.
bowled over by how that movie really affected me personally. And what I really like about Nolan is a theme that sort of runs through all of his films about guilt and how the past can impact the present and how you can never really escape your past. That kind of connects all of his films together. But I also just respect him so much as a craftsman and how he puts together his movies and how the structure of the films, from the structure of the script, especially the narrative, fits in with the theme of the film. And he does that a lot with each of the films that he does. And I just love having sort of two ways of appreciating his films. Like one from a very like emotional standpoint, I do find his films incredibly emotional. There's always an emotional core to what the story he's trying to tell. But there's also this great technical craftsman that's around it that I really love. And I think his films too are unique in that mainly all of his films are nonlinear narratives. There's a couple, one of them we're going to discuss today that is not, is very just straightforward. But I think his films reward on multiple viewings, and that I always appreciate too. Like I understand more what he's trying to do the next, several times I've seen that film. What about you? What's your take on Nolan?
I mean, I don't know a person who doesn't like this director or care about this director because I think he's rightfully so taken the baton from Kubrick to I guess Spielberg to Nolan. It's sort of how I see it. Like there aren't that many working directors right now or just in our times, who operate at that scale, who can deliver big blockbuster fare that has something on their minds and their event movies, but they're not popcorn entertainment. They have so much more to them. Like you said, amazing crafts across the board. And that's how I've always viewed him. Like I know that this is going to be you're going to be in good hands. It's kind of
Hmm.
how I've always felt that this is going to be an immersive experience, is going to be put together at the best of levels across the board. And once you leave the movie theater, you'll have something to talk about and think about, which is what I am always looking for in movies, right? And the fact that it's delivered at that scale, that is not some, small indie drama that I care about a lot as well.
Hmm.
There are very few people who can do that, and I think he can do that. He's always done that. I think the thing that's always, I shouldn't say always, but the thing that's held me back from him has been the emotional core of it
Mm.
all, like that you alluded to. I've struggled with sort of finding that, or maybe it's been the theatrics and the production values and the technical side of things have sort of overtaken the emotion of it all. And oftentimes the writing has suffered, and things like that. But there is a movie that I'll get into on my list where I think it finally all comes together. And I couldn't be more excited. But even if you put that aside, I mean, he's one of the greats. And
Hmm.
I'm so happy that, he has been formally honored with an Oscar in a very deserving way for this year. So we can all say that Christopher Nolan is an Oscar winner, which is
Right.
great to say. And I read that soon he's going to also be a knight,
Hmm.
which is kind of great. So no, in our time, especially where the movie business is in the shape that it is, it's we are lucky that we have someone like him who can unite us, to go to movie theaters. And there aren't that many directors across the globe that people know by name. He's certainly one of them.
Right. I mean, he is taking, like you mentioned, that baton from Spielberg in the sense of even people
Hmm.
that go to maybe one or two movies a year, they know that he's a
Yeah.
director that they would pay attention to. Be like, oh, he has a new movie coming out. I loved The Dark Knight. I loved Interstellar. I will go to see this. And I think the success of Oppenheimer proves that, you have a 3 hour biopic about a
Yeah.
physicist can turn into second highest grossing movie of the year last year. And also then win the Oscar too. Like I think you nail it on another thing that I really respect about him is he can do both the block. He can bring in the money, but he can also have something more to the film. I think those are
Hmm.
the filmmakers that I find the most interesting because I think it's very hard to make a movie that's quality, but then also delivers on those blockbuster roller coaster side of things. And it's easier to do just one of those, either be just a film that's maybe not only reaches like the intellectual side of the audience or then a film that only reaches like just the masses. But him, Spielberg's another one I think that did a great job of doing this. But Nolan's the new guy who can do this now and deliver giant blockbuster hits, but then movies that will last, for all time because they're about more than just the thrills. There's something else
Hmm.
behind every single one of his films, even though he strays more into the popcorn territory with some films, but there's always something else there. And that's what makes him such a unique artist. And that's why another reason why I love his films. I respect that he can balance those two things so well. It's a very, very hard thing to do, I find. Very few directors have ever
Yeah.
successfully been able to do it. But he's definitely the one we have now, which is why he's so unique.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And watching the movies on my list and your list and thinking about him a little bit more, like his arc is very interesting. And I don't know how much you want to get into that now. Maybe we should save that for when we are talking about the movies themselves. But his career could have gone in a very different way, I think. Especially after rewatching some of his, older movies that were all still carrying the same themes, but they were not operating at that giant blockbuster level.
Hmm.
And then something happens that sort of catapults him into a different sort of stratosphere when
Hmm.
it comes to scale. And then there's no looking back. And
Right.
suddenly he is the event director, but all those themes carry forward. So it's very interesting that, this career could have gone in a totally different way.
Yeah, no, definitely. And why don't we then start with his latest film? So this is the film that just won an Oscar a couple weeks back, Oppenheimer. So this is a film IMDb summary of the story of American scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer and his role in the development of the atomic bomb. Written, directed by Christopher Nolan, starring Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, and a host of other folks. So why don't you start here with? We touched on this a little bit during our Oscar episode. Both of us are big
Hmm.
fans of the film. Very happy that it was able to be honored in the way that it was, and have Nolan also be honored through this film.
Hmm.
But what was your kind of take on the film? Let's dive into it a little bit more.
Like I was hinting at a little bit, like I think this is the movie for me where all of it comes together for him, where obviously it's operating at that, masterclass technical level that we have expected from Nolan. Cinematography, production design, costume design, score, all of it, right? Like it's just at another level. Maybe even he's pushed himself further, which is so exciting to see. But I think what is impressive to me is the emotional core of it and how internal this movie is. And he's famously talked about the fact that this is all from Oppenheimer's point of view,
Hmm.
and the fact that he's using these giant IMAX cameras to sort of dive into the eyes and soul of Oppenheimer through Cillian Murphy. Like that's a pretty bold move, and I think that's where the emotional center of the movie lies. And also just a ton of restraint, I think. Like when I heard about that, oh, Christopher Nolan is making Oppenheimer and oh, he's gonna have like a real bomb. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is happening again. I don't know if I care about this. And then to show up and watch that whole sequence, which is so held back. And it's
Hmm.
actually about the silence and the devastation that it causes, but also the celebration and the victory because these people had been working on this for so long and the moral dilemma of it, but not sort of laying it heavy or thick with like, huge score beats or whatever. No, it's stripped down as it probably felt like, and that time. So that's when I really had this moment in the movie theater that, oh, this is like a whole other level.
Hmm.
And then to play with the complexities of his, as in Oppenheimer's personal relationships and what's fueled him, and the complicated character he is, and also his own reflections on himself of, cheering to create this thing, but then be totally haunted by it afterwards. And once again, the moral dilemma of that. And then Strauss, played by Robert Downey Jr., like that character, and the moral dilemma and sort of the very human nature of jealousy and vindictiveness. Like, I don't think I've been able to pinpoint these many emotional beats in a Christopher Nolan movie before, which is amazing to see and at this grand scale.
Hmm.
And then the last thing I would say, then I want to hear your thoughts, is like, I think visualizing genius and visualizing the process of creating something and being inspired by something is so difficult to do, because these are such kind of arcane things. Like, we all feel those, but how do you put this on screen and you get the cinematic language of this movie right at the get-go,
Hmm.
when Oppenheimer is looking at great art and listening to great music and things, and these kind of, fire shards that are kind of shown, that are sort of supposed to represent what's going on through his own body, his blood, his veins, his brain, all that. It could be very cheesy if
Hmm.
not done right, but it totally lands, and that's why you're in the grip of this movie. And then performance wise too, right? Like, there've been very good performances in Nolan movies for sure,
Hmm.
but to me, for the most part, it's been a Nolan show, right? Like, he's the star of the movie for the most part, and he's the star of this movie as well, no denying. But I think what Cillian Murphy's doing, and once again, I'm so happy that he's an Oscar winner for this
Yes,
movie. What a
me too.
deserving win. I think this movie does not work if you don't have a central performance like that. And of course, Cillian is amazing, but I also think, once again, maturity and restraint on Nolan's part to hand that sort of stage to Cillian, because I
Hmm.
don't think he's done that before. The theatrics and the technical craft, all of those, and Nolan, they've been, I think, on number one on the call sheet than the actors. And this is the first time I see that performance and writing and all of those things are at the same level as the rest of it all. And that's why the movie, to me, sort of is a culmination of his career, and it's at a different level, and a movie that has resonated with me of his more than any other. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I was also a big fan of this movie. I'll second everything you just said there. I mean, saw it 3 or 4 times in the theater when it was
Hmm.
out in IMAX. I think it is really the culmination of all of the different themes that come from his other movies, which we'll touch on when we get into his other films. But like I mentioned at the front, like this feeling of guilt and the
Hmm.
past having an impact on the present. I mean, the entire third act of the movie is Oppenheimer dealing with what he did. And the movie actually opens with the quote about, Prometheus giving fire to the humans and the gods tortured him for all eternity. And Oppenheimer realizing what he did, even though he was very driven, he wanted to create this for just the fact that he wanted to be the one to achieve it. There was this ego part of him. But then when he saw what it did and what it unleashed on the world, which is this arms race, and well, now the Russians are going to have to build bombs too, and we're going to have to build worse bombs, and they're going to have to build worse bombs. He kind of tortured himself, really, and put himself up in front of this committee and let everyone tar and feather him without fighting back. I mean, there's several scenes where his wife, Emily Blunt's character, does a great job in the film. It's like, why aren't you fighting? Why are you letting them do this? And it's clear because he's trying to cleanse himself of these,
Hmm.
quote unquote sins that he created. There's even a line too that she says to him when he's also has affairs with other women, and when one of the women passes away, probably
Hmm.
murdered, because he's sad about this. And she's kind of yelling and be like, you can't commit a sin and then expect everyone to feel sorry for you. Like, that's not how this works. Like, you can't get the pity now. You're the one who erred here. In that sense, it was cheating. But in the sense of the broader spectrum of the movie, it's creating this bomb. Like, we can't be like, oh, this is so sad. The creator of the atomic bomb is all sad about this now. It's like, dude, like, you did this. Like, you have to
Did.
somehow own up to this and do something to cleanse yourself of these sins, which I think is that whole third act of the movie, which the first time I did see it, I thought that the first act was definitely, more of a traditional kind of like biopic. Then it turns into almost like a heist film where, like, oh, we got to put the team together. We got to create this thing. And there's so much energy. And the third act just sort of feels, with this courtroom drama piece, like, okay, well, what, how does this kind of connect into the other parts of the film? And then it wasn't until the second viewing that I realized, oh, it ties totally to the theme of this is the part that he gets tortured. And that's really the meaning of this film.
Yeah,
Is someone wrestling with this guilt that they have through Oppenheimer. And I just think that, like you said, Cillian Murphy does such a brilliant job of this, but also Nolan of bringing in all these techniques and these themes, the nonlinear narrative, and then this feeling of guilt throughout the entire movie, which is again something a lot of his movies deal with, just so excellently executed here. I just think this film is incredible. And as much as I was upset that Nolan didn't win the Oscar several other times for other movies, especially Dark Knight, Inception, and then Interstellar, this is the one that I feel he deserves it more, actually, because it is
100%.
the crowning achievement. In a way, I'm kind of glad that he didn't get
Me
recognized for
too.
those films because this is the one that I'm like, oh no, this is the film that he deserves to get the Academy Award for.
Yeah, I totally agree because it's a culmination, and again, right? Like he's already in that tier. He doesn't actually have to push himself to
No.
get to this. And that to me is so admirable that a person who's operating at that high level continues to push himself and get better. And it's kind of amazing and stays. I mean, we don't know him, but he seems pretty humble, but at the same time has this kind of air of not pompousness or arrogance, but like more like I love what I do and I've put in the work,
Hmm.
that sort of air, and everybody respects that, which is again amazing. Like in this town, I don't think that many people have that kind of respect mantle, and he's definitely earned that. The other thing I was thinking of while you were talking about the three movies, it's such an amazing like genre blending exercise as well,
Yes.
Oppenheimer, right? Like it's a traditional biopic in many ways, but it's also this sort of, war epic movie where you have like this giant sprawling cast of characters that show up. And what was the war movie we did? Longest Day?
Yeah, The Longest Day.
The
Right.
Longest
For a
Day,
war.
right?
Yeah.
Like it sort
Hmm.
of has that kind of feeling where Matt Damon is basically, in a movie star part who
Hmm.
comes in and kind of charms his way through this movie amidst like a whole bunch of other great people. There's that happening. There's this very internal movie. There's this movie about sort of, the stakes of the world and the planet with everything that's happening between Einstein and Oppenheimer. There's also a family sort of relationship, loves drama sort of at play as well. There's this whole thing of sort of communism and how that is wrestling against sort of what he's pursuing. There's just, I think I said this in an Oscar episode probably, that this is quite the writing feat, I think, to sort of really blend in all these genres, and then not to mention the first person, and then Robert Downey Jr.'s
Right.
side.
Right.
There's that happening too. Like this movie should not work actually. It should be bloated and
Right.
boring and
Hmm.
overdone. But somehow it feels so light on his feet. That's the genius of this movie, and that's why it's a $1 billion grossing movie,
Hmm.
is that you can come and enjoy it, but yet also emotionally and mentally engage with it. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it moves. It never, at least
Yeah,
when,
it
I
never
mean, I saw it
stalls.
multiple times in the theaters, never felt like, oh my gosh, this is a 3 hour slog or anything. It's got that pace and it builds all to that moment of the atomic bomb at the end of Act Two. But there's still then that propulsion forward of like they've
Mhm.
seen Oppenheimer again get grilled by that hearing to take away his security clearance. It's so great. And I just want to call out to the scene when he's in the gymnasium and delivering the speech to
Ugh.
the people that worked on the bomb. So hey, we dropped into Japan. This is it's work. I think we ended the war, and that's when he first grapples with his guilt. I think is the best scene Nolan's ever done, honestly. Like where you have this the stomping of the crowd sort of getting excited to hear the speech that Oppenheimer's about to give, and that sound effect was used multiple of the times in the movie to signify his guilt at various points of the film of like, and maybe his girlfriend getting killed, and various points where he feels like he might be pushing himself too far, and then finally you realize what that sound effect is the stomping feet, sort of like a Edgar Allan Poe telltale heart kind of thing, and just how he, in that one scene, you understand the impact that Oppenheimer feels about what his invention was without even showing the devastation of what it actually caused, but you feel the emotion of what he's feeling of like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? What did I
Mhm.
just do? And it just, I mean, I think it's the best scene he's ever done in any movie. I just am floored by it, even just thinking about it. Just so excellently executed. Just incredible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to me, I think that's emblematic of his growth, right? Like you would think normally a Nolan scene would be some giant set, physical,
Right.
practical, special effect, bonanza with amazing crafts at play. And those are at play here for sure, but it's actually about the human experience, the emotion of it. And that to me is sort of his growth, right? Like he's transcended to this level that this is now his best scene, which makes me so happy,
Hmm. Yeah, just a
Yeah,
phenomenal film. Anything else you want to add to Oppenheimer? Or if not, we can jump into our top threes.
let's do it.
Great. So just to remind listeners of our format here. So now that we have the talked about the most recent film of the filmmaker here, in this case, Nolan, we're gonna go into our top three. So we're gonna pick our first love. So this is the movie that first got us into this filmmaker. Then we'll talk about our masterpiece. This is the one movie we personally feel is the best display of this filmmaker's talents. And then we have a wild card slot. This can be anything we want to bring to the table, a movie that we thought didn't work, a movie that we thought did but is underappreciated. It's sort of a fun way for us to throw in something even more personal into our exploration. So, starting with First Love, why don't you kick us off, Karan? What is your first love of Chris Nolan?
Yeah, so I think the first movie that I maybe remember watching more vividly is The Prestige from 2006. Obviously starring Christian Bale, Hugh Jackman, Scarlett Johansson, Rebecca Hall. Quick logline: after a tragic incident, two stage magicians in 1890s London engage in a battle to create the ultimate illusion while sacrificing everything. They have to outwit each other. So I think this movie, I remember when I first watched it, I remember being sort of blown away by once again the narrative, the non-linear narrative of it all. It's
Hmm.
all there. It was so fun to go back and rewatch this after years and years. But I remember kind of really being struck by that oh, this movie is so bizarre and strange in its kind of storytelling. Obviously, it's made at when these two guys, Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, are kind of upcoming hot new stars, and they're amazing in this movie. I'll talk about when they're not amazing as well, but they look amazing and they have just so much like star power and charisma and everything around them. And then I think the world building aspect of this as well is what struck me when I first watched it, that this is the world that I know very little about. And of course, there are many movies made in this period, but to kind of focus it on the life of magicians and the intrigue and the illusion and the pretense and the sense of kind of competition and heartbreak and jealousy, all of those things are kind of peppered in, but it's all behind this kind of facade of magic, which is kind of fun and dorky in so many ways. And so that's what I remember enjoying about this, because it just felt so new and fresh right off the bat. I felt like I'd never seen something like this, even though it felt like a kind of a classical style period drama movie, but it had, high craft and so a laser focused eye on what are we dealing with in terms of the plot and the story and the setting, because
Hmm.
there's so you could go so broad, right? But this is very laser focused just on these, four or five key people. On the rewatch, though, of course, I was like, yeah, the time shifting and all of that makes sense. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, yeah, this started way back. The crafts are amazing. They're all at play. But at the same time, I was like, this is very dorky. And I kind of was not to kind of look down on Nolan, but I sort of laughed a little bit throughout this movie that, oh, this is about magic. I mean, and people are spending way too much time being serious about this, and I think it's a very serious movie. Like, this is not Nolan winking that, oh,
Mm-mm.
look, this is kind of silly. No, he takes it very seriously. And then I started to think about, oh, is he equating movie making with magic in a way that, this is all about him and other people that maybe he's competing with as directors or storytellers trying to put their best foot forward, and once again those themes of guilt and such, like you said up
Hmm.
front, they're at play. But it definitely feels like an upcoming director or a younger director's movie,
Yes.
where maybe things are a little bit too self-serious, but it ends up being a little bit dorky. But even though it's fun and it's very well made, the performances are kind of all over the map. Hugh Jackman is not good in this movie. He hams his
Oh,
way through.
See,
Christian Bale is very good. Once again, the women, we've not really found a role yet for a woman, perhaps in a Nolan movie. There's some exceptions, I would say, but I don't know what they're up to just on the side. So it's an interesting, I don't know, peek into somebody's career and mind and head who's sort of upcoming and figuring things out. And it's pretty fun and fascinating to kind of then plot that Nolan to the Nolan we know now, because all
hmm
those themes are very much kind of being worked on, in that time. In some ways, Oppenheimer and Prestige are not that dissimilar in terms of, what's on their mind. Like they're very serious movies about, a person trying to kind of create something, unravel something, and the consequences of that, whether it's guilt, jealousy, what have you. But I mean, we just spent so much time talking about Oppenheimer. Like
right.
Prestige is not at that level, but it's a great entry point into that. So yeah, it's fun to see how the dork turned into a genius, is what I have to say.
Yeah. I had seen this movie right when it came out. I mean, at this point, after my first levels, we get into a second, every single one of his movies were opening weekends for me. And this coming right after Batman Begins, which, like I said, was a life-changing experience for me. It did move me to tears at the end of that film, just in terms of Batman finally being on screen. I was
Oh
definitely
wow.
disappointed in this film, and I know this. A lot of people hold this up as some great work. I think it's one of his minor works for sure. I think a lot of things you pointed out of seeing this film be a director still working on his craft and honing his craft. I mean, he was still young in his career at this point, and you can kind of see that a little bit. But there's a lot of brilliance in this movie too. I mean, similar to Oppenheimer, that starts with that sound of the feet stomping. You don't really know what it's going to be until later, and the feelings of guilt. This movie starts basically with the reveal of the trick, where you see the hats on the ground, which
Yeah.
is the plot twist. There is a plot twist in this movie at the end, and the hats kind of give that away, but you don't know what it is when you see it. And it fits in with the narrative structure of a magic trick, where Michael Caine's talking about, oh, there's this part when like you set up your initial concept, and then there's like a misdirection, and then the prestige is the final reveal of like what the
Right.
actual trick was. And that's how the movie is structured too. It's putting everything in the first 5 minutes,
Yeah.
everything you need to solve the plot is right there. But you don't know it. Just like in a magic trick, you're there and you see the
Right.
magician doing this stuff, and everything is there. There's no, I mean, magic isn't quote unquote real. It's not like a real thing. So everything you can do to solve the trick is in front of you, but the magician is so skilled that he or she is able to misdirect you. And the movie does that too. And I just love how the narrative structure of this film fits with the theme of the film. But the one thing that also, like when I first saw it, didn't really land with me, and now that I've seen it, maybe half a dozen times since, it fits a little, like I can kind of stomach it more. Is the whole movie is this period piece about these magicians, and then the twist turns into a sci-fi movie at the end, which
Mhm.
really for me the first time I saw this, it was kind of didn't work for me. It was too The genres didn't mesh in my mind. It's like either there's a real world where real magic isn't real and it's all tricks, or there's a world where magic is real and this is just an alternate reality, and that's where the movie kind of gets to. And I think I had difficulty with that, honestly, when I first saw it, that there was that sci-fi twist in the film. But now I know it's coming, and it's fine. And I think Bale and Hugh Jackman, for what the movie's asking them to do a great job. I mean, Hugh Jackman should be sort of this pompous, over the top guy who's just driven to always trying to be like this showman, right? And that's why he comes across a little bit as trying very hard in this part. But I think that's part of the character, less of he's just not there as an actor. I find this actually to be a really good performance of his, and I think him and Bale work really well together as like counterweights in this war of two magicians, battling it out to see who's the best, best of the best, basically. But on this rewatch too, I still think this is more of a minor work of his, but he's never made a bad film. So, in my
Yeah.
opinion, so this is
Yeah.
still something I would recommend if listeners haven't seen this movie before. I know a lot of people think it's like a hidden gem of Nolan, or it's one of his favorite or their favorite films of his. So I definitely would check that out for sure.
I agree. It's pretty fun. And yeah, more so, I was thinking about the performance comment you made. I mean, yeah, there's a hamminess to Hugh Jackman for sure, but I think the real, I guess, folly of the movie is in the writing.
Mm,
And that's the thing that I've always struggled with, Nolan, like I mentioned, until Oppenheimer, pretty
hmm.
much. I mean, of course, it gets only better and better as time goes by, but the stakes are not super clear. And that's when the acting kind of feels, school play a
Mm.
little bit. Because when the stakes are not deep enough, then it's like, I am going to avenge and I am going to do everything. Then it becomes that because that's what the writing is. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is interesting too, looking back on this film about like you were mentioning before, sort of is this Nolan's comment on filmmaking too? Like
Yeah.
this film asks a lot of questions about what you would sacrifice for art.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
Bale's character sacrifices certain things but draws a line at something else. And Hugh Jackman literally gives his life for
Hmm.
entertainment. Not that he dies in the end of the film per se, but he's basically giving everything he has to not only one-upping this other magician, but also just trying to one-up himself. Like he wants to be the best and have the ultimate magic trick. And what is he willing to sacrifice for that? And I think that's an interesting comment just on art and as an artist. Like, how much of yourself do you give? All of it? Or is there some line you're going to draw at some point? I do think the movie raises those interesting questions too, which
I
is I think it
totally
works on
agree.
that level. So I like how you called that out too.
Yeah. It's just that it's magic, which I think maybe I just have a hard time
Movies are
stopping
magic. You
that.
don't think
Oh,
movies are magic?
that's true.
They
That
are.
is
It's all an illusion, but it makes you feel that it's
true.
real.
All right. So what's your first love of Christopher Nolan?
My first love is the first film I saw of his, which was Memento. It's a film from 2000. Plot summary: a man with short-term memory loss attempts to track down his wife's murderer. It's a film directed by Nolan, also co-written by him and his brother, starring Guy Pearce, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Joe Pantoliano. And this film, I saw it in the theater. It was a very indie, small release. Got a lot of buzz online, and I went to go see this and was just totally floored with this film. And I think the gimmick, I mean, I call it a gimmick of this film in case people haven't heard from it. And it's kind of odd, it's not in the plot summary too, is the movie's basically told backwards. So every scene you see, the next scene is a scene that takes place before the scene that you just saw. So the movie progresses backwards, and that is a brilliant device that Nolan does, and his brother too. I'll give his brother credit as well here, but that the film structure mirrors the main character who has this short-term amnesia, memory loss. So each scene starts with you not knowing what's going on in the same way that the character also doesn't know what's going on because he can only remember his life in 5 minute chunks post an injury that he had when his wife was killed, and now he's trying to hunt down his wife's killer. So it's a very tight noir film that was really popular in the 90s. I don't know why noirs came back for about a decade, but it was just great film with great performances, but this extra twist of the narrative being backward just made it this really cool, fascinating thing that people were talking about. And I remember seeing this in the theater actually, and afterwards I went with my dad. I was home from college on a vacation or something, and it was me and him. And then at the end of the movie, like I usually stayed at the end of the credits, there was this older couple sitting in front of us, probably like in their 60s or whatever at the time. And they were like, "What did we have no idea what we just watched." And then I understood the movie. So like I spent basically like 10 minutes afterwards explaining to them like how it all worked and what this was like. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, like whoa, how did you know all that stuff?" And it's like, I don't know, I just paid attention or whatever. But so it can be a little confusing, I think, potentially. But I just love, again, that it is something that felt very fresh and new and unique at the time because of this structure. And I loved, again, it's how it mirrored the theme of the movie so much. And that's something that Nolan, again, does in all of his films. And actually, funnily enough, when rewatching it this time, I haven't seen this movie in a couple years, there are parts of the film that are told linearly instead of in reverse. And it's sort of a backstory explaining the origin of this character that are done in black and white. And it was just funny watching this after Oppenheimer, where he also uses black and white and color to
Mm,
separate the two narratives to help the audience figure out, okay, what part is in the future during the Senate hearing piece versus what is, in the past, and then what is told from Oppenheimer's point of view versus not. This movie uses a similar technique, and it was just fun to see this tool there that he used here to let the audience keep track of the story that he continues to use to this day. So I still love this film. I watched it a lot in college. I hadn't seen it maybe in like 15 years since this rewatch, but I think it still really holds up as a sort of electric kind of like you can tell this guy is starting off on a great career that he's going to have. There's a lot of ambition in here, even though it's not the his best made film by far, but it has that ambition, which I love. What are your Memento thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think I probably watched it soon after. I didn't watch it when it came out, but I watched it
Hmm.
later, I think. And it's funny that they actually remade this movie in Bollywood as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But I remember this that in the 90s, like this was sort of the movie that if you were like a cinephile or something, like you gotta have watched and loved Memento. Like it
Hmm.
was kind of in the zeitgeist, even growing up in India. Like people knew that. So it's funny how he was kind of a global director
Oh,
even
that's
even
cool. Like
then, which
right
is
away, kind of. Yeah.
yeah. It's funny, like, I don't know. I'm sure he's given interviews about this. Like, what is it with time that sort of captures him? It's always been there. And
Hmm.
this probably, I guess, barring Tenant, is maybe the most overt usage of that. But what I love about this movie is that it feels very gritty and handheld, you
Hmm.
know? Like as opposed to all of his other movies, especially after as his career goes on, they become bigger and such. I feel like this movie is a little bit of a transition point of sorts where, there's another movie coming up on your list, which is even smaller and grittier and more handheld. And then this one still has that kind of nerve to it, but it's getting bigger in scale as it kind of moves. But I love how quiet it is. There's a lot of like character work, and
Hmm.
you're in the breadth of the confusion of the world around this person and also in this person's own head. So it's almost interesting to me to rewatch these earlier movies, this one and another one that it's going to be on your list, that
Hmm.
it's almost like he pulled these movies back in his head, so to speak, to make Oppenheimer, where
Hmm.
some of the internal, more sort of grittier aspects of just character development, it's almost like he went back to his roots in a way. And the last so many years were spent sort of going broader and bigger in scale. And Oppenheimer, once again, sort of feels bigger, but also a lot more internal. And I
Hmm.
feel like this movie has that. And again, a great performance, which as time goes by, like I said earlier, I don't think of Nolan movies centered around performances, but Guy Pearce's performance at the center of it is amazing. It's very much in the Oppenheimer vein of sort of holding the entire movie.
Yeah, no, he definitely, and this is character arc of being so tragic, and you really care for him, but you feel these emotions that is at the heart of this film, which is like him
Mhm.
and dealing with the guilt basically of his wife's death, and you learn that he's involved in that, which is something that he's trying to forget or actually can't remember because of the injury that he has. But it's like again that guilt feeling. It's fun too that you mentioned that this movie had reached the India as well as being like the cool, it was like the cool indie movie that at least when I was in college was like,
Yeah.
oh, if you're a cinephile, you got to watch it. And I think it just goes back to this thing that Nolan could have made this movie even more like confusing and esoteric, but he does a good job. I mean, yeah, the narrative conceit is can be confusing, but at the end of every scene, he does something something memorable, like some action or the character saying something that is a line that you remember. So when he picks up that next scene, you remember, oh yeah, that's right, that's where we ended up last time. So he's
Right.
already thinking about the audience and not trying to outsmart the audience. He's trying to bring the audience along with him, which I think leads to the more I don't want to say mainstream success of this film because it's not like it was a huge hit. I mean, it was a hit in terms of what they paid for it, but it didn't
Yeah.
like break box office records or anything like that. But he's still thinking of his audience, and it's fun to see it not only reach India, but that it was. Have you seen the remake? That it was remade. That's
Oh
that's
yeah.
kind of cool. Is it basically like the same plot, or did they
Pretty
change some things? Or
much. Pretty much. Yeah. And pretty well made. It's the Amir Khan, the guy in Three Idiots, the
oh,
lead.
cool, he's in
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
He
Yeah.
plays the guy
He
Pierce
plays the
role.
guy and sort of went through a whole body transformation and
Oh.
bulked up and everything. So it was kind of a big deal.
Oh wow, that's cool. Yeah, actually,
Mhm.
Guy Pearce bulked down for this.
I
He was
know.
he was bigger for something else. I can't remember what it was, and then he like had to lose a lot of weight to kind of slim down, even though he still looks good. I mean,
Yeah.
it also was reminding me of how great of an actor he was, and sort of coming
Yeah.
off LA Confidential and Memento, and he was really had a lot of steam behind him. And, I guess you don't really make it. Some of these actors never make it to that Brad Pitt level. And I think
Mhm.
maybe he deserved to a little more than, I don't know, than his career worked out. I don't know. I thought he was
Yeah.
great, still great in this movie, and just fun to see, Pantoliano and Carrie Ann Moss, who I remember like watching this right after The Matrix just came out too, seeing
Right.
them interacting together in a different movie, and just this movie, just I don't know, it's still really fun and engaging and electric, I think is again the word to describe it. You know that this guy Nolan is going to be something big. It's just he's not there yet, but he's also, to your point too, not his ambitions are scaled back because he knows he can't this isn't a budget where he had $100 million to deal with, but he's
Hmm.
working within what he can do, but still trying to show his artistry. It's just a
Hmm.
movie that I still think really really works and goes beyond the gimmick of like, oh, it's a movie backwards. Like that can
Right.
be very gimmicky, but there's more to it than that, and I think they just does a great job of pulling it off.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think if you want to be cynical about Nolan, the whole like time thing can be quite gimmicky. And there are definitely movies where that sort of comes up more than others. That
Hmm.
feeling that, oh, is this just it? And has he just gone off the rails completely? And this is just a gimmick. But this is not that movie.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting too that you mentioned the thing about time, and I haven't really, after watching these films during the rewatch, and especially Oppenheimer, which is so much about guilt, I do feel that every single one of his movies deals with guilt in some way, and then I wonder somehow if time, guilt is an action, you did in the past that you want to redo, and you can't control time. Time moves forward, or at least we haven't discovered a way to do it yet. So
Hmm.
maybe Nolan, what he's trying to do with his movies is feel like he has power over time by creating these nonlinear narratives and feeling like the God who he maybe in his own life he wishes he could go back and change some things, but he can't. So he's doing that through the movies by forcing all these nonlinear narratives and things because that's the only domain where he has godlike powers. I don't know. Maybe I'm too psychoanalyzing him a little bit. I don't know so much about his personal life or things like that. But I wonder if those two things are related somehow. His obsession with time and nonlinear narratives, and also this theme of guilt that I think runs through every single one of his movies in
Hmm.
some way, shape, or form. Okay, so now that we've talked about our first loves, let's get into our next category, which is our masterpiece. So this is the film that we think is the best version of what the artist does. So why don't we start with you, Corin? What is your masterpiece for Chris Nolan?
I've already said everything that I had to say, but my masterpiece is Oppenheimer for him.
Mm,
I think, like I said, it's a culmination of everything he's done, you know?
hmm.
So at least right now in my mind, that is the masterpiece for me.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with this movie being in there. I mean, it is just phenomenal work that I think over time will just age better in his filmography, but also just in general. I think this movie will be remembered for sure,
Definitely.
for
Yeah.
sure.
What about you?
So my masterpiece is an older film of his, but still one that I also feel like in his obituary, much like Oppenheimer, this movie will be mentioned. It is The Dark Knight. So this is a film from 2008. Plot summary: when the menace known as the Joker wreaks havoc and chaos on the people of Gotham, Batman must accept one of the greatest psychological and physical tests of his ability to fight injustice. So the second movie in his Batman trilogy. He co-wrote it along with his brother and David S. Goyer. Stars Christian Bale, Heath Ledger, and Aaron Eckhart, and Maggie Gyllenhaal. Michael Caine as well. We have to mention he's in most of
Yep.
Nolan's movies in some way, shape, or form. So this movie, like I hinted at before, my love of Batman and the character of Batman, and I've always loved the comics, and I appreciated the Tim Burton movies too, and the Batman TV show. I mean, the great thing about Batman is he can be done in so many different ways. He's a sort of a way to express a lot of different ideas through the channel of Batman in this world. And Batman Begins just really did affect me in such a major way just because it's the Batman that I'd never seen before. And I think Nolan even ups the level here in The Dark Knight. I mean, I know this movie gets a lot of praise, so this might sound like just, plus wanting everything that everyone's already said to this, but this movie did hit me really hard when I saw it as well. And I think the genius of this film, and actually his Batman movies, is each of his films, the Batman films, are about some larger theme. The first movie was definitely about fear and how fear drives you, and how that is how Bruce Wayne was able to kind of channel his energy into Batman. And this film is really about hope, was ironic considering the Joker's involved in this, but it is about giving the people of Gotham some symbol of hope that will bring out the good in them. And, Batman can't be that symbol in this movie, actually. And the brilliant thing about this movie is he realizes he actually is not the one to bear that mantle for now, and then puts it into Harvey Dent, who's the DA,
Mhm.
played by Aaron Eckhart in the film. And the movie toys around with, well, why do people need hope and what do they need? And you have this force of the Joker who does believe that there's bad in everyone and that when people are pushed to the brink, they will devolve into the evil that every human is. Like there's bad in every single one of us. And I think Batman believes in the opposite. And the movie does too, because there's in the scene in the end where Joker's trying to set up these scenarios to push the people of Gotham to be bad. They won't. They won't do it. There's that scene in the ferries in the end. One of these ferries has to get blown up. There's a ferry full of criminals, a ferry full of just normal citizens, and whoever hits the button first blows up the other ferry. Or you let yours get blown up, or you blow up the other ferry, and the criminals decide they don't want to do it either. So I think I love the message of hope in this movie too that he's able to bring about, and it's just just an incredible film. And one other thing to mention too before I jump into your thoughts here is we talk a lot about sort of upping him as a filmmaker, and I think this movie really does expand even on what Batman Begins brought to the table. I feel like this is the first movie where he's really done action well and was able to
Yeah.
construct a massive action set piece, especially that middle part of the film where Batman's chasing the Joker with the semi truck, and then they go on the street, and that truck flips over, which is a practical effect. They really flipped a semi to do that, and you can really tell. And he's never really operated on that scale as an action director until that moment, and he's done it several times past with Inception and Tenet and the other Batman film after this. But I think this is him expanding his own capabilities in a way that I still think just works really well. Love this film a lot. It's incredible. So that's why I had to put it as his masterwork, even though, like I said, I think it's obvious to some that this would
Yeah.
be there. So, what are your Dark Knight thoughts?
Until Oppenheimer, I probably would have said the same, I think, because for all the reasons you said. But then, and I guess I should say that I put this movie as my wild card, which I
Mm,
think is sort of laughable that a big giant movie like The Dark Knight is a wild card, because people normally associate the wild card for something that's smaller. And
hmm
but I do think that this is a pretty big risk. It's hard to imagine. Like, we live in kind of a superhero, or I should say like a post superhero movie world now.
hmm
But it all started here. Like, before this and this time, people were not delving into this material with this level of seriousness and craft.
hmm
Even though the Tim Burton Batman movies were well done and well made and quite fun, they were not at this level. And then, of course, all the Clooney Batman movies or superhero movies had taken a totally different sort of goofy turn.
hmm
So that's where we were at. So to have this director who's proven himself with these very intricate, heady, mind-bending kind of storytelling narratives, very stylized and stylish, sort of masculine point of view movies, and apply all of that on this giant scale with the casing of an action movie and with like amazing performances at the center of it, obviously all crafts operating at the highest level, but applying all that to a character and IP, that was a huge swing, I think. And it obviously pays in spades. It changes everything for so many things, right? Like, we are in the superhero
Yeah.
age because of this.
hmm
The Oscars changed their best picture lineup to a 10 because of this, because this movie misses. And then, like I was hinting at earlier, that I think it's this movie that puts Nolan in a totally different trajectory. And it's after this movie then we start to go bigger and bigger, and scale is higher, and the mind bendiness is higher, all of that, right? Up till this point, to me, he's still operating at a slightly smaller register. And things could have stayed in the prestige lane or the Memento lane, but
hmm
I think it's this movie that catapults him. And I don't know if it was strategic or not, but at least it's smart and earned that he did this to IP. Like, again, it was a risk then. Now this feels kind of a tried and tested thing, that okay, apply your own sensibility and point of view to a character or IP that everybody is aware of. So you're going to get people in spades because
hmm
people care and love about this, but then they're going to come, you're going to have a lot of exposure. But if you deliver, that's just going to be 2 plus 2 is going to be 10. And now we know this. The Joker movie did that, the new Batman movie also did that, and there are many examples of that, but this had not been done then. So it's obviously a landmark movie. And then performances wise, I think you already mentioned this, but Heath Ledger's Joker is going to go down in history as one of the top villain performances, one of the top performances, period.
Yeah.
And that's obviously his genius and our loss as a world to not sort of have more of him. But it's amazing that that performance exists in a movie like this, which is it's sort of almost like a hat on a hat in a good way. Is
Hmm.
that because there's such an amazing performance in a movie of this kind, it sort of elevates it, right, to a whole other level.
Oh, exactly. And the movie could be just his performance. And the performance is so good that it could outshine
Yeah.
the movie, but the movie's
Yeah.
so good that it just works in it. Like he is this agent of chaos in a movie that is about Bruce Wayne's dealing with the decision that he made to continue to pursue Batman versus be with the woman that he loves, and
Yeah.
to the decisions that he makes around that, and then what it means to escalate the war on crime in Gotham. There's all these other bigger things, and the Joker just sort of there creating this chaos, which is another theme of the movie, like I mentioned. But Heath Ledger does such an incredible job, and it's interesting too that you mentioned this as a wild card. I think it's an interesting one because it's hard to remember back when before this movie, all the other movies that Nolan had did. I mean, they were hits sort of, but even Batman Begins, which is a movie again that I adore, only made like $200 million. Wasn't really a
Mhm.
big hit. There was no guarantee that they would make another one after that, and then that even they would give it back to Nolan to do it. It's easy to look back and think of that about, oh yeah, he's a big Nolan, director. This movie made $1 billion, The Dark Knight did, which is a huge accomplishment in of itself. But it's he was not a big director at the time. He
Mhm.
wasn't the name that, I mean, I was following him since Memento, but he was
Mhm.
more of like a film nerd sort of guy. He wasn't a
Right.
mainstream. He didn't have the Spielberg kind of name recognition at this point. This movie gave him that. And
Yep.
I think it was a chance that the studios took on him to be like, you know what, we're gonna give you another Batman. We're gonna cast Heath Ledger, who is someone who it's hard to remember this too. Like hated everyone on the internet was upset by the choice. I remember seeing that news beat and
Mhm.
I was like, Heath Ledger. I mean, I liked 10 Things I Hate About You, but the Joker, that's weird. And like
Yeah.
no one like was thought there was a horrible idea and there was set photos leaked of what he looked like. And like, that's not the Joker. This looks ridiculous. And there was so much hate towards that casting choice. And then immediately the second the movie came out, you're like, you forgot that that was
Oh,
controversial at all, but it was a wild card in so many different ways. So I think I love how that was the film that you want to this is the film that you want to bring over to the wild card state. And because it worked, it gave Nolan the blank check to kind of go on and make Inception and to do
hmm
things on a scale with original ideas. The
hmm
Interstellars, the Inceptions would have happened. Tenet
No.
never would have happened without this movie being as good as it was and then delivering critically and commercially especially. It's just a monumental achievement on every level, and I'm glad that he has this in his filmography because you're right. If this didn't work, or if he never got this chance, he probably would. He still would have been successful because he has talent, but he wouldn't have been operating at the level of a Jim Cameron or a Steven Spielberg.
There's no Interstellar, there's no Oppenheimer either.
Right, you're
You don't
right.
get a blank check to make a movie like that if this success and this movie is not on the table. I also want to give a quick shout out to, I guess, two other people with this. One, Christian Bale, who doesn't often get a lot of credit because Heath Ledger sort of takes overshadows from a performance standpoint. This movie
Hmm.
and is the one who's remembered, but I think Bale is the best Batman we've ever had.
Oh, agreed. Sure.
I love Robert Pattinson, but it's a totally different tone. But I
Hmm.
think as Batman as we know it from the comic books and one had imagined, like Christian Bale totally brings that in this movie. And he sort of is the heart and the center of the movie. It's a very understated performance in many ways. And it's by design, because if
Hmm.
you have to have that if you're going to go up against Heath Ledger's Joker. So there's that. I want to shout him out. And then Hans Zimmer, I think they worked together many, many times, but this is the movie I always think of. Like the Batmobile is racing through Gotham City and the blaring horns.
Hmm.
It's sort of symphonic and pulsating and accelerating and everything you want a movie to be. It sort of hits you in all the ways, right? And it's almost one of those Spielberg John Williams like collaborations coming to fruition. Like without that amazing score, this movie will not be what it is. And then of course they work several times after.
Yeah, the score is absolutely phenomenal. And it's kind of embarrassing to admit this now, but when I saw Batman Begins, like I mentioned, I was moved to tears at the end. But the one thing that I would have given criticism to was like I was not a fan of the score, actually. I was surprised
Mhm.
there wasn't a theme. It was too sort of like tonal and there was not many melodies in there. Over time, I grew to like Batman Begins, but I thought it was a very radical shift from what I imagine a superhero score to be. But I think that's the Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard too, who did the score with him,
Mhm.
to their credit for what they did in Batman Begins. And then this movie, they elevated even more. I mean, the Joker theme of just having that 1 to 2 notes on that violin
Right.
is just absolutely incredible. And even what they did with Rises afterwards, too. I think this whole trilogy actually is just phenomenal across the board. And I agree with you on the Christian Bale piece too. He is the best Batman, and I think what Nolan does so well from the outset of his Batman trilogy is they make it about Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
It's not Batman, it's about
Right.
Bruce and what he's going through. And again, the first movie is about the fear, this is about hope, and then finally in the last film, he gets to give the inspiration that Batman deserves to the whole city of Gotham and go down as a legend and a symbol like all the things they set up in Batman Begins. And then, another moment that no, we're not talking about Dark Knight Rises, but I'll just put this point on it too. I just love that that movie ends with Bruce Wayne getting a happy ending. He gets to actually retire and go on and live the life that he should have lived the whole time. That movie also like just gets me very emotional at the end. Like I love Batman so much, and to see him finally freed of the burden of
Mm.
bearing the cape and cowl is just such an incredible moment.
Mm.
These movies are so I rewatched all of them actually. I couldn't
Oh,
just rewatch The
nice.
Dark Knight. I'm like, I'm gonna rewatch the whole trilogy, and it's just what a world that Nolan created with this. But I think I love you're bringing this as a wild card though. Just it's hard to remember what a risk this was.
To close us out, what is your wild card?
So my wild card is actually Chris Nolan's first movie called
Mhm.
Following from 1998. The IMDb plot summary: a young writer who follows strangers for material meets a thief who takes him under his wing. And this is written and directed by Chris Nolan and stars Jeremy Theobald, Alex Haw, and Lucy Russell. This is definitely an indie film, all black and white in 4:3. I saw this for the first time probably I don't think it was right after I saw Memento. I think it was probably after Batman Begins that I was like, okay, this guy is incredible. I got to go and find his earlier work. And I remembered liking the film at the time, and I think it's becomes more fascinating. And this is why I put this in my wild card over the years of just seeing how much of Nolan is in this film and how he is. Yes, his scale has changed and he's better executing these ideas. But again, you have the nonlinear narrative. You have the themes of guilt that go through this film too. It's like everything is there. The messing with time is a big factor of this. And this even the score, for some weird reason, this time I was watching this, like this sort of has Inception type of sort of very
Yep.
tonal, synth kind of sounds to it that is just interesting. And maybe that, Nolan likes this type of thing. And that's why, even when he collaborated with Zimmer, that's what he wanted in Inception. But it feels like everything is here, but not yet fully realized to the extent that it is. So it's just fascinating to go back and watch this movie, which I think does work as a great sort of tight little noir film. I think it's like 70 minutes too. It's not even really that long. He shot it without even permits, sort of like on the street with a 16 millimeter camera, a very low budget, just as like a calling card movie. And I still think it just works really well, and his genius shines through even in this level of filmmaking. So what are your thoughts on Following?
Yeah, I'd never seen it before. I always wanted to see it, so it's a good excuse to see it. I kind of love this movie. Of course, to your point, all the trappings of a Nolan movie with the time and all of that is there. But as a younger filmmaker's black and white short movie that can often be very, very pretentious and just hollow,
Mm-hmm.
and if you squint your eyes, maybe there's a little bit of that here too, understandably, because you're just shutting out the gate. But I think this
Right.
movie works and it has a lot of depth to it. The performances are great. And kind of what I was saying with Memento, I think here again, more so than that, it feels very intimate. It feels
Mm-hmm.
very handheld. It's very internal, kind of what we see once again back in Oppenheimer. So it's sort of interesting to really chart his whole arc from the following to Oppenheimer. Because in again, like I was saying earlier, that Oppenheimer and Prestige are similar in like a dorky sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
This to me sort of felt like the true parallel of the following and Oppenheimer kind of being these internal heady movies that are very focused on specific people and what is going on through their minds and the actions they take. I kind of loved it. I want to watch it again. The moment I finished it, I wanted to watch it again. And
Mm.
that's sort of the power that I felt from this movie. And I guess as we are ending our lists here, which we probably haven't mentioned, but it's obvious, is that another important thing that makes, I think, a director like a super director, or certainly if you have this tool in your toolkit, is the ability to work with movie stars
Mm-hmm.
and get what movie stars have to offer. And sometimes in the process even make movie stars. And you see that throughout his entire career. Of course, he worked with the top stars across the board, which has helped him to mount these movies, get the kind of financing, get the kind of butts and seats. But even in this small movie, I don't know whatever happened to this actor who plays the lead here, but
Mm,
it's a movie star performance, you
hmm.
know? Like you sort of watch this guy and you're like, oh, this guy's going to go places. And I don't know what really happened to his career. So it's kind of fun to see that Nolan had that ability to kind of tap into these. I mean, he has a type for sure. His
Hmm.
men are sort of
Oh yeah.
angular,
Yeah, they look like
sort of
him. We can just say
lean, exactly,
it.
handsome, masculine in a very sort of classical way,
Yeah.
and kind of broken and brutish. That theme has carried on. And you're right, maybe he sees himself in them.
Yeah, he
Um,
dresses them like him,
yeah,
like Leo has the same haircut as him in Inception,
exactly.
and they have the scarves and Tenet with the Pattison. But anyway, we don't need to psychoanalyze them more, but
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. Kind of fun though, actually.
yeah, no,
So
it
yeah,
is fun. But I think that's a really good point that like he is able to create. I mean, even looking at Cillian Murphy, right? He was worked with him starting in Batman Begins and worked with him several times over the years, and now he's given him he like helped create his career and
yeah,
now has given him an Oscar and let him, they know each other so well and they've worked with each other so long. He's able to trust him in delivering what he did in Oppenheimer. And I think that is something you have to have, like working actors that you like know and trust, but then also be able to plug in a Leo, plug in a McConaughey, and have
yeah.
them work so well. And they do. Like he is able to do that.
Yeah. No, this was really fun to kind of go through his whole career, and it doesn't surprise me and or shock me, but it's amazing to chart out to see how his arc has kind of gone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And in a way, it's kind of sad when I think about this because I think it's great to see like following that everything's there. And then he's given Mementos like a small kind of hit. And then he works with Pacino in, Insomnia, but then he gets an IP and then he's
Yeah.
still good to his original thing. And he takes a while for him to get the $1 billion Dark Knight. But it's like several films into his career, and now he has the name and he's the big star. And nowadays, I just feel like they're not going to give the Nolans that time of like, okay, try this. Here's a smaller budget thing. Yeah, you're working with Pacino, but it's still not a big budget. It's a remake of, a
Right.
Norwegian film or what have you. And okay, we'll give you Batman, but it's not going to be like Batman was not doing well at the time. Like this is after, the Batman and Robin thing. So they let him kind of get to the point that he is today. And I just think now it's like, unless you come out of the gate with the Dark Knight or the Inception, they're going to push you aside or they'll give you the
Yeah.
keys to some established IP like a Fast and the Furious. You work within this, but you can't go out of it and then become, great your Inception or your Tenet or your Interstellar. It's just kind of sad. I'd like to think I'm wrong and that there is still space for careers to develop like this. But he needed that time. He couldn't have
Yeah.
made Dark Knight on this first movie. He just, and he'll admit to that. It's like
Yeah.
but the bones were all there, but it just needed
Mm-hmm.
time. He needed time. And
Mm-hmm.
I think nowadays we don't give directors the time that
No.
they, or the actors too, but I think it really falls
Yeah.
more on the director side. The studios just kind of took. I mean, maybe this is part of also the Marvel effect as well, where that
Definitely
those
is.
movies are
It
run
is
by the
this.
producer, not the director,
Right.
so they don't really care who the director is.
Yeah. I'm hopeful. I think after this past year and the fact that the Marvel machine is kind of where it's at, sort of feel like we are at the beginning of a new chapter.
Hmm.
And I think people are seeing that originality, original voices, and doing things in an interesting way, big or small, is rewarded. And people want to see that. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll try to remain hopeful.
Speaking of that, we always do this fun thing on these episodes, which is what would we like the person who we spend the last hour or so talking about want to do next? So, what do you think Christopher Nolan should do next?
Yeah, this one for me was easier than some of these other ones that
Oh,
we've done with
really?
other people. Yeah, and it's a Western, and it's one of my favorite
Oh,
genres,
huh.
definitely. And the scenes in Oppenheimer of
Yeah.
Oppenheimer and his wife riding those horses in New Mexico, I saw that and I'm like, okay, I want an entire Western by Chris Nolan. Like I remember the first time I saw the movie thinking that the second I saw just how he shot those just wide open spaces. And I think they could do, again, guilt is another theme that he has, and that there's a lot of that wrapped up in the Western. I mean, that's about colonization and the destruction of a native people that this country has to wrestle with. And I think there's some interesting things he could do with that. I'd love to see him do a Western. It's a genre he hasn't touched either. So, what about you?
I guess I have two. One is sort of very on the nose and obvious because this has sort of been talked about, which is that I would love to see a Nolan Bond movie. I
Mm,
think and maybe he's has had conversations or is having conversations, who
Hmm.
knows, but I think that would be kind of amazing. And I say this of course for the obvious reasons of the technical craft and such, but I think I also want Nolan to have some fun. I think all these
Mm.
movies over the last so many years have been so in the head, and I would love for him to find a way to do a Bond movie that's a bit of a cross between Daniel Craig's Bond and maybe Sean Connery's Bond,
Mm.
like a little bit of tongue in cheek. I feel like after Oppenheimer, he's hopefully just kind of crossed the chasm in terms of like writing and storytelling, which has sort of been like a week. By week, I mean like lesser than the other
Yeah, right.
departments. I mean, it's still amazing,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah,
This is Nolan we're talking about. But
right.
yeah, hopefully he can let loose and have some fun with that now that he's sort of, built up his writing chops even more.
Mm.
So that's one.
Yeah.
Number two, watching the following made me feel like, what if he went even more intimate? And I keep saying this, that this is there in Oppenheimer too. Of course, it'll have to be a big event movie because that's what he does, and he won't be. I want him to do that because there are fewer and far people who are doing that. So
Hmm.
still make it cinematic and operatic. And I don't know what time period he should place this in, maybe contemporary times, but kind of have a more intimate sort of character-driven piece as opposed to something that gets where the bomb is the star that brings people in or something. Like, I would love for him to do a more intimate sort of character drama, if you will.
So, also speaking of coming up, why don't you talk to our listeners about what we have coming up next? So, we're moving on from a director into an actress.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking about Kristen Dunst. She has a new movie coming up, Civil Wars. So it'll be fun to talk about her. Yeah, excited about that conversation.
Yeah, that'll be out in 2 weeks on the 17th.
Well, that's our episode. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. And if you have any comments and thoughts about Nolan and the movies we covered or the movies that we didn't cover, please feel free to comment in the comment section. As always, we appreciate your feedback and your ratings and subscriptions to us.
Yeah, we definitely do. So make sure you leave those ratings and reviews, and we will see you next time.
We'll see you soon.
Goodbye.